All right, so here we go again. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, everyone. I'm Anila Ali. I'm the president of AMWEC, American Muslim and Multifaith Women's Empowerment Council. I'm pleased to welcome everyone to this event, Reimagining Hajj in the Age of Corona. Thanks to all of you for joining us. AMWEC is a female-led nonprofit that aims to strengthen American Muslim and interfaith communities. We are proud American Muslim and multi-faith women leaders who unite to strengthen our communities, confront bigotry in all its forms, celebrate cultural heritage, and build enduring bonds with fellow Americans of all faiths. We just celebrated Eid al-Azha this year with special social distancing measures. Mecca was mostly quiet. The largest annual gathering of Muslims was temporarily stopped. To make sense of Hajj in the time of pandemic, we at AMWEC decided to organize this discussion about the past, the present, the future of the Great Convention with our esteemed panel of experts. Our goal today is to learn insights on Prophet Muhammad's original Hajj, nearly 1400 years ago, and to take stock of the Corona era changes happening in contemporary Muslim communities, and to explore how we can all find renewed meaning in our personal spiritual practice. We are extremely grateful to Professor Reza Aslan, Imam Dr. Mohamad Jebara, and Professor Ahmed Ghosh for joining us. Each of them brings a unique expertise to today's discussion. First, Professor Reza Aslan, a scholar, a renowned scholar of religions, who has developed a reputation as a particularly insightful academic whose punditry minces few words. I met Reza in 2005 at the Pacific Asia Museum for an event about the book that we're giving out, No God But God. I was delighted to discover a scholar on Islam who was provocative and meticulous in his research. I often recommend his books to anyone wishing to learn about Islam. In fact, today we are giving out signed copies of his books, No God But God, to the first 50 people who registered for today's event. He's a recipient of the prestigious James Joyce Award. Reza is also the author of 3 internationally best-selling books on religion, including the #1 New York Times bestseller, Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth. Welcome, Reza. Next is Imam Mohammed Jebara. Dr. Jabara is an Arabic language expert and specialist in Semitic root words. He served as chief imam at the Cordova Center in Ottawa and is known as the cycling cleric for an annual bike ride. He organizes to benefit charities like United Way. Dr. Jabara serves as educational coordinator of the Algebra Society, which he develops, where he develops self-improvement resources incorporating core principles of Islamic scholarship. Jabara is also an exceptionally talented calligraphy artist and a poet. Most relevant to our discussion, he's the author of the forthcoming biography, Mohammed, the World Changer, to be published by St. Martin's Press. Last but not the least is Professor Ahmed Ghosh, who teaches in Women's Studies Department in San Diego State University. She has published extensively on many topics, and one of them is Muslim women in Afghanistan, India, and American diaspora. She has her PhD in cultural anthropology from Syracuse University to go along with the 2 advanced degrees from the School of Social Sciences at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Deeply engaged in community development in San Diego, California. She's currently president of the board for License to Freedom, a refugee organization in San Diego focused on domestic violence. Let's ask all of our panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves, and then we will get straight into our discussion. We'll start with Professor Reza Aslan.
Thank you, Anila. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be joining you virtually here for this conversation about virtual Hajj. Obviously, as everyone knows, we are facing a global pandemic that has devastated lives around the world. It's the kind of human crisis that we haven't seen in over a century. And it's obviously not only disrupted lives, disrupted economies, disrupted governments and politics around the world, but it's also had a fairly impactful role in changing religion. And so in this conversation about the ways in which these changes have occurred, particularly within Islam and more particularly within the pilgrimage rites of Islam with regard to the Hajj, I think these are questions that are not just fascinating from an academic perspective, but these are questions that will hopefully lead to what will be a kind of fundamental shift, a real permanent change, not just in the way that the Hajj works, but in the way that we even think about our role as a community of faith. And I'm looking very much forward to having this conversation with Professor Ghosh and Imam Jebara. Thank you for having me.
Imam Jebara, and I'll unmute you.
I think it's unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, that's muted. Well, it's a pleasure to be on the sound over today. And as Professor Aslan mentioned, it's a unprecedented time. And with every new challenge, I believe the new opportunity to be explored. I think that that's the beauty of every challenge that arises, that allows us to transcend the difficulties to move on to even greater heights. And that's what we'll be discussing today, and see how the Prophet Muhammad, over 1300 years ago, was able to do the same thing.
Dr. Ghosh?
Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here and to learn new stuff. And also, it's a great honor to be on a panel with such esteemed scholars. It's a high point in my life today. Yeah, I'm really curious to see how the debate unfolds today because, you know, being in women's studies and having worked on gender and Islam, I suppose my main role is to talk about women and Hajj and women in religion and spirituality and stuff like that. And I feel that, I mean, it's a bit early to predict how this virtual world will impact gender, social class, race, ethnicity, and the countries, various countries that are involved in sending people out to Hajj. But there are some questions I have and which we can all share together, and also be hopeful that if this does become a virtual religion like some others, that the inclusivity might increase. And that's something that I would be looking forward to is, you know, how to make it more inclusive through affordability, through attendance, etc. So there's always a plus side to evolution of technology, and so I'm hoping that'll happen.
All right, we're going to come back to that point of inclusivity and women and how it's going to affect us. But let's start with asking Imam Jebara to give us like a brief history of the word Hajj. What does it mean in Arabic, and what is the original physical image the word Hajj describes?
Yeah. Can you hear me? I think people aren't hearing me very well.
Yes, we are having some difficulty there with the sound, but just close.
Very close, and you don't seem to be hearing me still. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. It's a little muffled, but if you speak close to the speaker and just speak slowly, Imam.
Okay.
If you want to try getting out and coming in again, sometimes it works, but there is a sound coming from your computer or your room.
Okay.
I think maybe headset. If you have a headset, that might help.
Okay. I'm not sure if it works with the microphone. Okay. Let's start. Yeah. So the concept of Hajj, can you guys hear?
Yes, go on, Imam. I think we will manage.
Okay. So the concept of Hajj is not new to Islam. It's, it's an ancient Semitic concept, and it revolves around the a fire that draws people near. When you think of the concept of Hajj, even in the Old Testament itself, in the Tanakh, it's mentioned 56 times, and even in the Torah, in the book of Exodus, we see mention of it 10 times, in which where the prophet Moses is imploring Pharaoh to release the children of Israel. And the fascinating thing is he continuously uses the word Hajj, which is Hajj in Hebrew. And he says Hajj or the Adonai, so that the concept of the Hajj, which is this fire that essentially drew people near and allowed people to come close together, was symbolic of people who are divided to come close to each other and to be united together as one element. So the concept of Hajj revolves around people who are scattered, people who are disorganized, or people who have different ways of seeing the world, to come together for something that is common. So that is the root aspect. So the root image is the image of a fire that was built upon a mound or upon a mountain that was placed upon on top of a high standing structure to allow people who are traveling in the desert to come close together, to come together and to break bread together and share ideas together. That is the essence of the concept of Hajj. So it wasn't new to Islam, but what the Prophet Muhammad does, and through the last months of his life, is take this concept of Hajj, which is ancient, and bring it back to its original concept, which is bringing people together. So by the time of the Prophet Muhammad, Hajj had deteriorated down to rituals that had no meaning. It became a place for people to come together to make money, to exchange for economic reasons. It became a merchant activity more than its original purpose, which was to bring people together to share ideas. So imagine the ancient nomadic cultures of the Near East. People are traveling during the day, doing whatever they need to do, whether it's herding sheep, whether it's working in the field, and each person is doing their own thing. And by the end of the day, the people gather together around a fire, and around that fire, which is also the word Hajj, and they share ideas, share experiences. And this is what allows them to take these experiences, these shared ideas and shared experiences which they're learning from other people, bring them together to improve their own lives. So that was the original concept. So the Quran mentions the concept of Hajj 11 times as the word Hajj. And the fascinating thing is also mentioning two other forms as Hajj and Hijaj as well. And the fascinating thing, which is very surprising, is that in the story of the prophet Moses, when Moses goes to Midian and he's engaged to work for 8 years or 10 years, the word that is used is Samaniya Hijaj, which is very fascinating because that's not the normal word used in Arabic for years. So why did he use the word Hijaj? Because the word Hijaj implies a process of gathering information to improve yourself. So it's not just about living life year in, year out, but it's about improving yourself 1 year after the other year. That is the root aspect of the concept of Hajj in terms of its linguistic value, which is very powerful because at the very basis of Hajj, the word itself is telling us its purpose, and its purpose is to bring people together, as the Quran tells us, وَأَذِّن فِي النَّاسِ بِالْحَجِّ يَأْتُوكَ رِجَالًا وعلى كل ضامر يأتين من كل فج عميق. That's the purpose of the Hajj calling people from all over the world. And the concept is the Quran does not say وَأَذِّنْ فِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ or مُسْلِمِينَ. It doesn't say, make a speculation calling people saints or Muslims or believers, but rather it uses the concept and nas, which is all people. So Hajj is not intended to be a Muslim ceremony or a Muslim ritual. The Quran tells us that Hajj is intended as a convention for all people from around the world, and it says from every distant land, from the farthest corners of the earth, people coming together to share ideas. And it's fascinating that the following passage tells us لِيَشْهَدُوا مَنَافِعَ لَهُمْ, that the purpose of Hajj is لِيَشْهَدُوا مَنَافِعَ لَهُمْ, which is, it uses the concept of shahada, which is to become an expert witness, to become an expert, and shahada relates to gathering information, processing it, and analyzing it to improve your life. So the Quran tells us the purpose of Hajj in the following verse, not only to gather people from around the world who are diverse and different to come together in one place, regardless of their background, but for them to improve their lives by interacting and sharing ideas and sharing information. So when you come to Hajj, you're supposed to open your mind, open your consciousness, and when you leave Hajj, you're supposed to become more open-minded and have become more experienced in ideas than you were before. It is not, and that's fascinating because what the Quran reminds the people of Arabia as what they have forgotten in relation to Hajj is that the people of Mecca at the time of the Prophet had made Hajj limited to rituals that were devoid of improving themselves. So they came around, they walked around the Kaaba, they clapped, they whistled, they did sacrifices. It was all rituals. The people who went to Hajj didn't leave as better people. They didn't leave as more open-minded, more accepting, more understanding. Actually, on the contrary, they left feeling more self-righteous because they're better than others because we performed the ritual. And with anyone that it's not the purpose of the Hajj.
Raza, I'd like you to comment on the fact that this was, from what I heard Dr. Jebara say, is it an Abrahamic tradition that the Prophet's legacy was to continue that for Muslims?
Yes, well, I mean, it's historically true that the Hajj experience, the Kaaba, the pilgrimages, the various rituals involved in the Hajj predate the Prophet Muhammad by hundreds of years. This was a tradition that the polytheistic Arabs took part in, and they most definitely understood their actions, their rituals, as being steeped in the example led by Abraham. Of course, the mythology centered around the Kaaba is that it was actually built by the Prophet Abraham. So, yeah, unquestionably, the sort of the importance of the action that the Prophet took in transforming the pilgrimage and the ceremonies attached to it into the center of this new Muslim community that he was forming was a deliberate attempt to attach this community to the past, to attach it to the legacy of the Prophet Abraham and the prophets who came after him.
That's very interesting. I have another question for you, Professor Aslan. What do you think has been the legacy of this first very important Hajj that the Prophet left for the Muslims? What do you think has been our legacy, looking at what's transpired in all these 1400 years?
Well, I think it's important to understand that the Ummah, the Muslim community that the Prophet Muhammad created in Mecca, was a wholly new and unprecedented way of organizing a community. In the time in which the Prophet lived, there was really only a handful of ways to organize yourself. There were kingdoms, there were empires, there were tribes, and that's pretty much it. And clans, and that's pretty much it. tribes and clans are blood relations, right? So you're a member of a clan or you're a member of a tribe because of some kind of familial connection. Empires and kingdoms were top-down organizations in which your membership at that time had to do with your religion, but they were geographically contained, right? You lived within a border, and so therefore you belonged to that empire, to that kingdom. What the Ummah represents is a massive evolutionary leap in the way in which a group of people could actually organize themselves, because this had nothing to do with your blood. Didn't matter your kinship or your family. It didn't matter your ethnicity. It didn't matter your citizenship. There wasn't really a thing called citizenship there, but nevertheless, it didn't matter which tribe you belonged to. It didn't matter which clan you belonged to. It didn't matter whether you were living in, you know, distant Spain or in Yathrib. The idea was that what made you a member of this community was your allegiance to this faith and your confession to the Prophet Muhammad as the messenger of God. And so, as you can imagine, you need something very specific to maintain a sense of solidarity in this community. You don't all speak the same language. You don't all have the same skin color. You don't all live in the same area. You all have different blood and different ethnicities. So then how do you bind yourself together? So the genius of creating this one central location that is meant to symbolize the oneness and unity of this community, and that all members of this community, no matter where they lived, would at one point in their life come to this to sort of establish themselves, just to communicate their identity in this collective, really was probably the most important, most formative act that the Prophet did in actually creating this new kind of community. And of course, since then, it's continued to evolve into that role. I mean, as diverse and as fractured as that original Ummah was, it's far more diverse and far more fractured today. There are, hundreds of sects, hundreds of ethnicities, Muslims in every corner of the world who have almost nothing in common with each other. And yet, nevertheless, this symbol of the unity and oneness of this community still is maintained. That's its genius and that's its legacy.
That's very interesting point. Now, when you put it together, I realized, yes, that is a genius point. Ummah gets together every year. How is that going to impact us? Let's talk about that. Dr. Ghosh, when performing the Hajj, men and women are together. There is no separation of genders. And I'm just happy that I did Hajj many, many years ago when I lived in Saudi Arabia. This equality between sexes and, as well as all the races, was something that Prophet Muhammad stressed in his farewell sermon. And so today, women are still required to have a male guardian to get a Hajj visa. And so can you describe how this tension plays out in modern Hajj? And what are we looking at in the future as women? Just a minute, I'm just gonna unmute. Unmute. I think you have to do that.
Yeah, I did it. It's very unfortunate, of course, the inequality, given that all Muslims are called upon to perform the Hajj. But we have to understand that the gender divide is not confined to Islam. It's in all religious texts. And if it's not in religious texts, then it's in constitutions, philosophies, and governments. I mean, it's in cultures. So, it's patriarchy. And so the difference now is that how refined has that patriarchy become. And it is unfortunate that for Islam, and especially in the last 40 to 50 years, there has been a re-traditionalizing of Islam through basically a political reincarnation of it. And I like to make a distinction between the spiritual aspect of Islam and etc., and the political Islam, because that has created in the last 40, 50 years a few more complications for women and other genders globally, you know. It has really aggravated the situation, and simultaneously, of course, there's also been more resistance to it, and we do see, you know, the emergence of Islamic feminism and contesting of some of the, you know, issues that are seen as oppressive. And I do want to point out, now that I have the floor, is that I am of the belief, and I write a lot on gender and Islam from a feminist perspective, that women, women and men, everybody in Islam who practice Islam and other Muslims, should also stop being defensive about women's roles in Islam, because no religion really gave equality, whatever we mean by it. And I have reached a point in my life with my gray hairs now where I say, yeah, maybe that was wrong. Maybe that's not part of social justice. Maybe that's not part of equality, but do I throw the baby out with the bathwater? And today, given some of the Islamic concepts of ijtihad, etc., we can question and try and bring about change. And so therefore, with the Hajj situation too, the questioning has to happen, the resistance by women and women's groups and enlightened Islamic scholars have to be there, that they should be seen as individuals in their own rights. Because if you're under 45, you need a mehram who's a male escort. If you're over 45, you need to be part of a group, a tourist group, and you know, all those kinds of issues are there. Another issue that really has to be picked up, and we'll talk later about it, that if it does go virtual, might make a difference, is also the level of sexual abuse and harassment of women when they go on Hajj. And the lack of basically recognition of this by the Hajj officials in Saudi Arabia. So, you know, gender is not just about attending or not attending, but also how women are really treated there. And then, of course, if you identify as queer and you're public about it, then you're not allowed to go on Hajj. So I think that gender, instead of using the word women, I want to use the word that gender equality is definitely there. And these are issues that need to be addressed in the modern era, where we have progressive Muslims and progressive ideologies, constitutions, and a rights-based kind of discourse. And that may bring us back full circle to your question, where you say that Prophet Muhammad wanted everybody to attend, you know, and trying to look for that kind of evidence in the religious text to improve the situation for women who want to go for Hajj.
All right, I will ask Professor Aslan something. Picking up on this theme of equality, access to Hajj, equity, bringing equity and social justice, the Hajj, as Prophet Muhammad modeled it, was a time to reinforce the essential quality of all human beings. Do you feel, Professor Aslan, do you feel that spirit has remained the same in the modern Hajj? Some pilgrims have perceived striking inequality in their experience, like Hajj has packages, huge, $10,000+ and others yet, you know, go there and they have saved up, you know, their meager salaries, $3,000 for a person who saves his money in Bangladesh for 2 years and then goes on his pilgrimage. So what are the tensions like that in the Hajj experience that you see that we could talk about and reform going forward post-COVID, the virtual Hajj that we're all reimagining?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you asked this question. Again, one of the most striking innovations of the Prophet Muhammad was his insistence that regardless of whether you are rich or poor, a king or a pauper, you all have to dress exactly the same way. You all shave your head, that you shouldn't be able to tell who is whom when you're on Hajj, that everyone is on equal ground the way that they are in the eyes of God. That was an incredibly important statement about what the community was actually supposed to mean. And it is something that has been absolutely and utterly adulterated by the Saudi government in the modern Hajj. I mean, when you can rent a $10,000 a night hotel, you know, a hotel room overlooking you know, the great mosque, and when you can have, you know, Sherpas essentially carrying your things around for you to make you comfortable. I mean, clearly something has broken down in this original vision. Professor Ghosh is absolutely right to talk about the fact that there is a lack of equality when it comes to genders still, when it comes to sexual orientation still, when it comes to skin color, unfortunately, still. But the greatest divide in the modern Hajj is the one that the Prophet tried hardest to actually rid us of, which is the gap between the wealthy and the poor. And that's the thing that you cannot ignore when you see the modern Hajj today. I think it's a stain on the pilgrimage and on the Holy Land.
Dr. Jebara, a lot of young people were in the audience who came to hear Prophet Muhammad at Mecca. The energy that Prophet Muhammad ignited in the hearts of those young men, it inspired them to go to Mecca and bring the spirits of those messages that Prophet Muhammad gave and pass it on to the world. Even today, we see a lot of young people that are fighting for social justice. Can you describe to us who were some of those young people that were in the audience at that time?
Thank you so much. So among the people that the Prophet Muhammad had gathered to come to the Hajj, there were reported that there were over 114,000 followers who attended, and bringing non-Muslims, spectators who also participated in the Hajj, bringing the number to over 120,000. So these young people that we're speaking about, we're not only followers of the Prophet Muhammad, being termed Muslims, but they were also young Christians, young Jews, and also people who are still pagans, who were also welcome to come. And this goes back to the reason why the Prophet Muhammad insisted that the Hajj take its place in the outskirts of Mecca. So the original Hajj concentrated around the Kaaba and its vicinity. So what the Prophet Muhammad did, be part of the new visionary outlook on and the way he changed the Hajj. He said, no, the Hajj, he said, Al-Hajj huwa Arafah. Al-Hajj Arafah. So Hajj culminates in this mountain, this area called the Arafah. And the Arafah revolves around people coming together and bringing ideas together. So Ma'rifah is for you to know someone else who's different from you and understand them, understand their ideas, and understand their experiences. This is Ma'rifah. This is the root from which we get the concept of Arafah, which is about people interacting and trying to understand each other. And just like Professor Aslan mentioned, that this is the core purpose of the Hajj is to bridge that gap between the rich and the poor, between the educated and the non-educated. Also, as Professor Ghosh mentioned, that there's definitely unfortunate discrimination against women, and as Dr. Aslan also mentioned, in terms of people being treated because they're of a different skin color, etc. So all of these things the Prophet Muhammad highlighted in the Hajj, in his great sermon at the Mount of Arafah. And the fascinating thing is that the word Arafah is supposed to remind us, the word itself is to remind us that its purpose is for us to overlook our differences. That's what the Quran says, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. This is the concept that God has made us different. He's made us into many nations, many tribes, many cultures, many ethnicities, many identities, because God has done that on purpose, because we are supposed to appreciate the differences that we have, because we're not intended to all be the same. We're not intended to be monolithic. We're intended that the ideal community in the faith of God, according to the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, as we will see from his last moment, is for people to be different. And this is the message that resonated with young people who are attracted to them, because young people by nature want to be different. They want to challenge ideas and norms that are illogical, that suppress and that take advantage of people, ideas that are unjust, ideas that are founded in tribalism, nepotism, etc. That young people want to have the opportunity, and this is what attracted them to the sermon of the Prophet Muhammad. And and we will see that even after his time, when we have the great schism and we have the great civil wars and great civil tension, these young people who were there, who were teenagers, who were 14 and 12 and 11 during the time of the sermon of Arafah, who came out, who had these peaceful demonstrations going, outside of the house of Uthman, as we know, later on in the thousands, calling for a return to the spirit of Arafah, a return to the spirit of equality, a return to the spirit where women have rights and their voices are heard, the spirit of a place and time where young people are respected and their voices are heard. The same way that the Prophet Muhammad, one of the first acts that he does after the conquest of Mecca, and I should say after the liberation of Mecca, or the unlocking of Mecca, because that's the word, because such literally means to unlock, to open up, because Mexican society was in essence closed, their ideas were closed mentally and philosophically and socially. They were a closed society, and he wants them to open up. Who does he think? He thinks a young boy, Attar ibn Usayd, a 16-year-old, and he says this 16-year-old is going to become the chief imam of the holiest site in Islam. And that was a great shock to the elders of Arabia, in whose culture, if you were under 40, you had no right to be in a position of importance. So he says that, and he says, no, it's not based on age, it's not based on tribal affiliation, it's not based on gender, it is based on your ability as a human being. You as a person, what is your contribution to society? And it's based on your value as a human being, and you'll be given the opportunity. And that is a difference, is that he called for equal opportunity. Because you can be a greatly intelligent person and gifted, but if you're not given the opportunity, then unfortunately that will be wasted. And that is the great message that resonates with Muslim people who are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, pagan, Zoroastrian, and many others who were present at that day.
Well, let's now shift to something that perhaps we all want to discuss.
Can I just interrupt you?
Yes, of course.
I'd like to add to the class and ethnic differences a little bit.
Please do.
Yeah, because I'm in total agreement with both the panelists that social class plays a very, very big role. And the only reason I want to add to it is also, if it goes virtual, what will it mean, So besides the cost getting so inhibitive because it is so controlled by the Saudi royalty, that it has really become problematic. But there are other things that I think bring about differences. And one is that, whether Muslims are a majority or a minority in a particular country, I think that plays an important role. And the reason I bring this point up is I'm looking at like India, which has the third largest Muslim population, but it's a minority population. So I really want to just touch upon for a second on how Hajj gets politicized, not just by the Saudis, but also these countries. And so when India was under the Congress or the previous regime, the government also paid for people to go on Hajj. There were flights, there were costs that were shared by the government, which was a recognition of the Muslim minority. But in the current government, which is more right-wing Hindu, we are seeing a less of that happen. So, costs become an important issue and gets tied in with politics. We have also seen that Saudi Arabia has played politics with which countries they give preference to based on their relationship. And I'm going to be really political here with Israel and the US, but I do want to bring out the political aspect of Hajj in modern Hajj days that become problematic. And also I have found that depending on in which country is it the Shia or the Sunni that are the dominant Muslim body that the government listens to or that has the power has also affected those going for Hajj at the, so we need to, I just want to give a bigger picture to the whole thing so that when we ask for innovations and changes or internationalize Hajj in terms of who controls it, and if we are looking at virtual, that these differences are also taken into account.
Well, I've been following Mohammed al-Shuraibi. He's the founder of the tech company Centillion. He's in Saudi. And he's argued in his recent opinion piece for Newsweek, and I quote, by focusing only on the inconvenience of the present moment, many of us are unable to see the incredible opportunity that lies ahead of us. And he's talking about a virtual Hajj that, post this pandemic, can we turn this Hajj in this virtual opportunity into an opportunity to bridge that divide that we're all concerned about, that is against the actual words of our Prophet, So, so a question for you, Professor Aslan, what opportunities do you and then the other panelists do you see for this year's Hajj, given the next year's Hajj, given the global health conditions? And how do you think this virtual Hajj is going to change that for women, for people with different socioeconomic classes? And what can we do to improve and actually follow the message of the Prophet and keep in the spirit of Arafat?
I think that this could be one of the most exciting things that has happened to Islam. I don't know since when, for a number of reasons. The obvious one is the one that we've been talking about so far, which is that the Hajj has become something different than what it was originally intended, that it has created divisions within the Muslim community when the entire point of it was to create unity and cohesion among the Muslim community. It has become a thing that is absolutely untenable to the vast majority of Muslims in the world. And for those Muslims who do go there, they feel, as we've already discussed, that they're set apart, that they're different, that they're often not welcomed. And of course, what we have, we only mentioned this slightly too, which is the incredible and grotesque politicization of the Hajj, where the Saudi government now decides it will reward countries with which it has, good relations, by giving them a certain number of visas, and then punish countries that don't actually fit with its geopolitical aims. But all of that is obvious. I think that all of that is very important. But there's one other thing that I want to add to this, which is that going back to my original comment about the Hajj, the Ummah in the 21st century is already a virtual community. We are a virtual Ummah now. If you say, where does the Ummah actually live? 1,500 years ago, you could say it lived in the Arabian Peninsula. And today you would say it lives online. That's where it lives. Mm-hmm. The young people, especially, like Dr. Imam Jebara was mentioning this a little bit, the young people especially are increasingly coming online in order to connect with Muslims around the world who, again, may not share their nationality, may not speak their same language, but have similar sentiments, similar ideas, similar values. And for the first time in human history, that Muslim kid in Los Angeles can actually form a tight community, a tight bond with a Muslim kid in Jakarta, mm-hmm. Simply because they see their faith in the same way. They never would have had access to each other in the past, except by physically figuring out a way to show up at the Hajj at the same time. So more and more young people are going online for their fatwas, for their religious edification. Fatwaonline.com or .net, fatwaonline.net is issuing ready-made fatwas, on any subject that you need. And so in a way, this seems like a natural evolution. This idea that, yes, for those who can still figure out a way to make it to Mecca, great. But for the vast, vast majority of Muslims who cannot, for a whole host of reasons, including politics, which is why I can't go, that for those people, having this experience of a virtual Hajj, which was created out of necessity this year, but which we all hope and pray will become a regular feature, is one of the most exciting things to have happened in Islam since, the translations of the Quran.
Well, I want to quote something that you said, Professor Raza, and it brings me back to your book. You said once, the Islamic Reformation is already here. We are all living in it. What do you mean by it now that we have a new virtual reality?
Well, the term Reformation is a complicated academic term, but fundamentally what it means is a clash between individuals and institutions over who has the authority to define a faith. And that clash has been going on within the Muslim world for more than 100 years. It has a lot to do with widespread access to education and new sources of knowledge, the dissemination of information, globalization and the free flow of movement. All of that has emboldened individuals to experiment, to come up with new interpretations, new ways of experiencing Islam, ways that are no longer in the grip of the monopoly of the ulama. This is a perfect example of that, is the ability to have a Hajj experience that is not mediated by what a government that holds in its own hands the decision over who is and who is not a Muslim, who can and cannot experience this mandated religious experience. None of that matters anymore. Those gatekeepers can be gone, and you can have an experience that is unmediated, uncontrolled by an institution. That is a perfect expression of what I mean by Reformation.
Yes, and I that was 2005, and this is 2020, and we're seeing a lot of that happen, as you said. In interest of time, I'm just going to ask all of you to think about what would that mean. We already have apps for Hajj, Umrah and Hajj apps. What would that mean for our future generations, Muslims going forward, and them experiencing and feeling that I have access to Hajj and Umrah? And I believe there are lots of advocates in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia now who are saying, well, it's estimated that it would take 581 years for all the Muslims in the world alive today to journey and perform Hajj. Let's make it virtual. And, we've heard our experts, all of you, think that it will bring equity and that sense of justice to Hajj. And the virtual also gives access to elderly and seniors. When I went for Hajj, I saw women who had come from the interior of Punjab in Pakistan. They were 91 years old. And I thought, they don't have to come. They saved all their lives. And my heart was more into their plight than it was in the performing the rituals. So I just feel that this is an amazing opportunity for people like that. And so I would like you all to think about your closing comments. And just also, I would like you to think about what opposition could we get from within the Muslim world if we do have, if we have progressive ideas coming forward and saying, let's have a virtual Hajj and it's okay, and let's make it all accessible. What do you think we're going to hear on the other side of opposing arguments? Let's start with Professor Ghosh and then go to Raza and Dr. Jebara.
I agree with Reza on everything he said. I mean, what could come up, especially in the near future, which I hope will not last for too long, is again the class divide and who has internet, who doesn't, and all of that kind of stuff. But I can see it happening in India, where in the village, they put up a big TV screen, and somebody has it. So the accessibility would be much, much better. And like I said in the beginning of this discussion too, when it comes to gender, race, class, sexuality, it really takes care of all of that. And that in itself is such a progressive thing for the Muslims and a reflection of Islam, the true Islam. So I think, going virtual might be an excellent idea, but of course we cannot forget that the resistance and the pushback will be immense for the Saudi royalty itself, or let's call it the government, because the whole financial crisis, the impact is going to be very, very huge on them. And the reason I bring up the financial impact is also currently with the decline in the oil prices and everything else, you know, there is a whole, again, economic aspect to it. So the resistance will be huge, and how they use their allies to resist has to be kept in mind. To me, the main issue that could be brought up by them and other conservatives or traditionalists who want to see the physical performance of Hajj is of how to legitimize it. Would there be a resistance where they said, okay, you can do it online, you can, you know, do the virtual Hajj, but it really doesn't count as a pillar of Islam? And to me, you know, it will be the mullahs, the scholars, who will have to really wrestle with that, because by delegitimizing a virtual Hajj or by minimizing its importance in the individual's life, could be used as something that then, you know, brings about this doubt on the person who wants to engage in a virtual Hajj, which is the way it should be. So I have a few reservations there, but I think those are more short-term reservations, and if people in the right places with the right kind of thinking work on it, it would be a brilliant idea. And maybe this is the positive thing about COVID. Maybe COVID is an Islamic conspiracy.
Thank you, Professor Aslan.
All I'll say is that people with access and power don't let go. It's as simple as that. So those who stand to benefit either politically or economically or religiously, those who have access, those who are empowered to define who can and cannot take part in these kinds of rituals, will not want to in any way shift the status quo. Now, I do think that it kind of doesn't matter, because you know, progress is progress, and I think that it's very difficult to reverse course. Once you allow people around the world to experience Hajj in this way, it's impossible to take it away again. So I don't think it's going to matter much, but I do definitely agree that there is going to be an enormous amount of pushback from traditional quarters to this notion of allowing the virtual Hajj to be part of the pilgrimage experience for people around the world.
Thank you. And Dr. Jebara.
I think the only thing to move forward, just like Dr. Aslan mentioned, that there are people who are going to oppose, and you know, there are people who are grounded traditional, about whatever traditional value is supposed to be, whatever they come from. But regardless, this is the very essence of what the Prophet Muhammad did, and that's a fascinating thing, is that the story of Hajj is all about this man in Arabia, the Prophet Muhammad, who stood up against these established norms that sought to separate, sought to subjugate, sought to keep people confined. And the purpose of the Arab and the purpose of the Hajj is to liberate people, to liberate people's minds, to liberate ideas. That's why the Quran calls it Al-Hajj al-Akbar, which is this great convention, to this great place where people, where ideas are shared. And it's really fascinating. I started my talk by mentioning the prophet Moses and the story in Exodus where the context of Hajj, the Hajj is mentioned 10 times, where the people of Israel, the Israelites, were enslaved in Egypt for hundreds of years, 300 years, whatever number it is. The point is, as slaves, they were separated, they were divided, and the purpose of taking the people out into the desert, into the Migdal, into the wilderness, for them to have a convention, so people's ideas can change, so that these people whose ideas, who have been brainwashed and have been programmed and asked to be separated from each other, and separated by class systems and ethnic divide and social divide, were asked to come into the wilderness to share ideas and to liberate each other. That is the story in Exodus. That's the purpose of why they were asked to go out into the wilderness. And the Prophet Muhammad comes, and the establishes them. And now, unfortunately, just like our respected panelists mentioned, that there are grave injustices in the Hajj. I went to Hajj when I was 21, and it was a great shock for me because there was a big difference between the theoretical that I have learned from the ulama and then going there and seeing the reality of the discrimination and the racism, which was a big shock because that's not what we expect. We expect that Hajj is a place of equality, it's a place where people feel respected, where women are respected, where the poor are respected, where everyone is equal, where everyone comes together. And unfortunately, it's not the situation the way it is right now. So this is an opportunity for us to try to revive the spirit of the Hajj in the way that the Prophet Muhammad had established. And I would like to close off with one last point, which is a ray of good hope and a ray of sunshine for us, is that despite all the segregation that has been imposed, through the centuries, and the innovations that were imposed to separate people, and as Dr. Aslan mentioned, you can get, one person can get a fancy $10,000 a night hotel room and have people carrying their things, and basically even carrying them. You have people being carried around the Kaaba and treated like royalty, whereas others are poor, living in extremely poor conditions. That despite all of that, that even in the most conservative place, that there is no segregation of the sexes at the Kaaba. There is no women's section when they're doing tawaf. Men and women go together. And even when I was at the Haram praying, there were women standing all around me. And this is the only remnant, true remnant of the original Hajj. And it's a ring that, yes, even though a lot of the elements have been lost, but it's still there. And the name that the Prophet Muhammad gave, each name, the name of the word, the Arafah, even Muzdalifah, which is getting people to come near to each other and people to feel like they're one. Mina, a place of contemplating ideas and sharing ideas and debating and thinking and pondering and trying to improve oneself. These words, the ideas are still there. And it is up to us to revive them. And Hajj is not about, again, I'm going to repeat it, the Hajj of the Quran and the Hajj of the Prophet Muhammad is not about ritual. And it's not about a place. It's about a convention of ideas. And it's a convention which helps empower people and raise people to the next level. So I hope that will be part of the result. And yes, it is very difficult that this is a calamity that's affecting people around the world. But hopefully through the difficulty, there will be ease and that something good will come out of it.
I think something will, when I read the Quran, what really stands out is it's pious men, pious women, believing men, believing women. So why does man discriminate? I always ask that question. And with that, I'm going to ask all of you to say a few words and then we will end our discussion. I do thank you all for being on this panel, and those of you that have registered, be sure we're going to be sending you a copy very soon. Reza, any parting words?
I just want to say thank you, everyone, for this conversation. And I always say that, moments like this are moments that we can either wallow in the tragedy that we're experiencing or think about the ways that we want to permanently change society so that these kinds of tragedies don't become commonplace.
Absolutely. And your book inspired me when I read it, and the thorough research, it made me think. And that's what I think we should all do. Muslims, we need to think. Professor Ghosh, any parting words? Let me unmute you.
Firstly, thank you very much. It was very informative and enlightening, and to the audience for being patient. I think this has started the debate, and already there are 3 people, 4 people, or many more on this panel who are for it. So why can't we start the movement? and let's take it forward. Yeah.
I'm hopeful too. And parting words, Dr. Jebara.
Every great idea begins with one word, and every great person begins with one person. So you know, there are many people who think right, so I'm very optimistic for a better future, and that this is going to be done. It's going to snowball into something much bigger for the years to go on.
Thank you. And with that, we pray there's more access to Hajj for everybody and that we are all able to bridge the divide. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for your precious time and thanks for watching us. Bye-bye. Thank you.